What's up, you guys? I'm Dan, this is Frugal Not Cheap, and today let's have an honest talk about Tesla's full self-driving beta. So with Tesla now starting to roll out the full self-driving beta program to sort of regular users, before they had a very limited set of Tesla employees and a few testers. I think in total they said maybe about 1,000 to 2,000 users total. So as you can see, very, very limited, certainly not at all public. Now they've begun a very slow rollout over time to more sort of members of the public based on criteria. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But because it is rolling out to sort of more the John Q public, to some degree anyway, very slowly and with care, which is good, I thought it'd be a great time to discuss Tesla's full self-driving beta in a little bit more detail. So one, we should talk about what Tesla's full self-driving beta really is. What is the full self-driving suite meant to do? Next, let's talk about the current state of affairs with the latest beta, which is 10.2. At midnight tonight, on the day that this video comes out, they are planning to release version 10.3. But as of this filming, 10.2 was the latest version. So that's, of course, what we'll discuss. And then finally, I'll give some thoughts about what the potential is moving forward, and also how I intend to use the full self-driving beta when I receive it myself, because I have in fact signed up to get the beta. So first, let's talk about what Tesla's full self-driving is. And so, as with some things with Tesla, sometimes the way that they name things might not necessarily be the best. There has been some contention about the name autopilot, because of course the car cannot drive itself. But again, in this case, I think the name is pretty good. An aircraft autopilot basically just maintains course, so you can leave the controls alone and it will continue doing as it's doing. And to a large degree, that's what happens with the Tesla vehicle as well. With autopilot, you get traffic-aware cruise control, so it maintains speed along with other cars. And it also has auto steer, which means that it's able to keep within its lane even as the lane is turning. And there are no limitations on how sharp that turn can be, unlike with some competitors like Blue Cruise or something. I don't know. Sandy Monroe called it Blue's Clues or someone, I think. Anyway, so that's autopilot, and I think the name is apt. Now, when we get to full self-driving, everyone thinks this just means that the car will drive itself. And actually with Tesla, it means a set of specific bullet points that are on their website. So here we have navigate on autopilot, which is still in beta, which is basically from on-ramp to off-ramp, that it will change lanes based on having too slow traffic and passing them, changing lanes as necessary to follow your navigation route, all this kind of thing. I do have that on my car. I do agree that it should still be in beta. It does some kind of silly things sometimes of trying to jump around lanes too often, and it's really not all that good about being about changing lanes when it needs to get into an exit, depending on how kind or not the drivers are in the lane that you're trying to get into. So it still has some trouble, and I do agree that it should still be in beta, but it's very, very reliable for the most part. So it's very rare that I have to intervene. And if I do, it's usually just to cancel a lane change that it wants to take, or to initiate a lane change that I wanted to take that it hasn't decided to do just yet. And that's just a flip of the turn signal stalk. So not really a big deal. And I found it to be extremely safe. I had, I think, one instance of phantom braking since I bought the car in late February of 2021, and now here we are in late October. So FSD has navigate on autopilot, which again, it says beta, but it's very reliable, but I do think it is beta. It's not quite as polished as traffic-aware cruise control and auto steer. Then we have auto lane change, which is changing the lanes on the highway when auto steer is engaged. So this is without navigate on autopilot. It's just when you have autopilot engaged and you hit the turn stalk, then it will make that lane change for you. I found it to be extremely good at that. It doesn't have any blind spot problems, of course, and it has very good situational awareness in a way that I wouldn't. So this feature is very good. And it does not say beta because, well, again, it is very polished. Next, we have auto park, which is the ability to parallel or perpendicular park. Until recently, it's needed to have two vehicles in the adjacent So if you were trying to do the perpendicular parking, you needed to have two vehicles with a gap in between in order for it to park, and it would use the ultrasonic sensors a lot for that. And parallel parking, I think it's always been okay at, although it did kind of scare me when I used it the other day. I think it would have been fine, but I hit the brakes just because I was a little uncomfortably close to the car behind me. But in general, I think this feature is fairly good. Not perfect though, so they're working on it. And one reason is that they are transitioning to using vision more than just the ultrasonic sensors in order to do this the auto park. So there's probably a little bit of transition right now until the capability is going to be much better in the future, I imagine. And then you've got Summon and Smart Summon. For some reason, these bullet points don't say beta on there. I really think they should because, well, all right, Summon's pretty good, I guess, for the most part. But there are instances where, for instance, if you are in the path that the car wants to take, it will avoid you very aggressively, which can mean that the car could actually hit something else when it's trying to aggressively avoid hitting you. So it's not a perfect feature. It should just stop in that scenario, of course, right? And then especially Smart Summon, where the car is meant to come to you in a parking lot. I found that feature to be very much beta. If it's very clear, very simple scenario, it's fine. But the software behind this feature is well behind the vision-based neural nets that are behind the full self-driving, which we'll talk about next. So this is the final feature within the full self-driving suite of capabilities, and this is auto steer on city streets. And once this is complete, once it's able to do auto steer on city streets, then it's got the parking lot stuff with Summon, and then it's got the highway stuff from the autopilot itself, and then also the navigate on autopilot. Then you've really covered all the scenarios, right? You've got from parking lot to parking lot, including some highway travel, and so that really means the car has the basic capability to get anywhere. So that's what's included in full self-driving, and for now, of course, it's very clear. It tells you the limitations of all these things, that it needs to be still supervised by the driver. And so that's something that I'm always doing. I always have my hand on the wheel, and I'm prepared in case the car does anything silly. But again, the features that I'm using all the time, which are auto steer and navigate on autopilot, they're very reliable at not making unsafe maneuvers. There's only been one unsafe maneuver that I've seen so far this year, and that was when it mistook some railroad that I was crossing over. For a moment, it mistook it as being the road, and it tried to turn onto the railroad. So obviously that was very bad. But again, I had my hands on the wheel, and so as it tried to tug that way, then pressure was put on it on the wheel by my hand, and that's how you disengage auto steer. And autopilot is just by tugging at the wheel enough against whatever that autopilot wants to do, then it will disengage it and you're able to very quickly take over. And that's not a terrible way to transition to talking about what is the current state of what's known as FSD Beta 10.2. So here I think it is unfortunate that they chose to call it beta, because they have some beta features. If we look in the software, it says beta, that are much more polished and safe to use, with supervision still, but in most cases extremely safe, and in many cases safer than a human driving. Those things are called beta, but they really shouldn't be, whereas this FSD thing is, in my view, much more of an alpha product. It's just, it's very raw. Yes, they have been iterating. We've had, since version 8, then we had some stuff with a version 9.x, and then currently we are on the 10.x scenario. And they've, as these version numbers change really something about the software architecture behind the neural nets and the processing that's done. And so they have made some major improvements here on the back end, things that, of course, you wouldn't necessarily see on the front end in terms of the behavior of the vehicle, but if they're on the right track, do extend the potential for the software in the future. So what I mean by that is I did a long, very detailed overview of Tesla AI Day, and in there, I go a little bit of covering, well, actually, of course, they covered this, and then I talk about how they covered this, some of the history of the visual processing in the neural nets. And we see there that they used to use, of course, image by image, and they didn't really cache a lot of data. And so some of the improvements that they've made over time have been to start processing video clips instead of just single images. So this gives you a sense of time as well, and you can capture a lot more persistence in data. And then there are also caching features over time and distance as well, things that you would want to remember, like, oh, I'm in a left turn lane. That kind of thing is not something you want to forget every millisecond, right? So there have been improvements along those lines, and that's how we've gone from version 8 to version 9. And then in version 10, they did a lot of stuff like, it might have been 10 dot something, but they started injecting planning into sort of the neural net cycle, the thinking cycle. And so there has been some improvements. And I'm told that, or people have said that it's really overfit for California roads. And what that means is that the data has, the neural net has been very heavily trained to work in the scenarios that it encounters in California. But that it has not been fed all that much data or fit to the data that it may have, that Tesla has gathered for other locations. And you might think that driving is really very similar between California and, say, here in Texas or up in the Northeast. And to you and I, it is very, very similar. However, for a neural net, very small differences can seem very, very huge to it. And so it takes a lot of training. So if you think about, we can always go back to just visual processing of a single object. So say a fire hydrant. I could show you, let's say you had somehow never seen a fire hydrant before. I could show you a picture of a fire hydrant and told you this is a fire hydrant. And then you could see another one of a slightly different shape or size or color, and you would know, oh, that's a fire hydrant. Dan taught me about fire hydrants. Neural nets are not like that, right? They need to see thousands of fire hydrants of various colors and lighting conditions and what have you before they start to recognize, oh, this is most likely a fire hydrant. And even then, it's a probability, right? They're not entirely certain. I guess we are not, but I don't know. We kind of do heuristics and jump a lot more in our thinking than the neural nets do. So what I mean, this should help you understand why, even though things might look very similar between California roads and Texas roads and Michigan roads, any small variations can be very, very big for the neural net and can be a challenge that requires much more training and feeding of data for those new scenarios so they can adapt. And so that's one hopeful reason why we could think that maybe the performance that we're seeing in a lot of the beta testers that are in different locations, some up in Michigan, like Dirty Tesla, I think is up there. And let's see, Chaz Cook is down in Florida. And who else are the big ones that I watch? I can't remember where Rob Maurer is. Wherever the Harley Davidson factory is, or Harley Davidson Museum. I don't know why I can't think of the state. I apologize to you if you live around the area. But anyway, Rob Maurer of Tesla Daily has also got FSD Beta, and so you can see how it does under different scenarios. So there is hope that as they start to train more for these new locations, that of course we'll start to see the kind of performance that people are seeing in California extend outwards to these new places. So we can't necessarily judge it. I think the best way to judge the current state of Beta 10.2 would be those drivers that are in California. Now, even among those drivers that are in California, where it is, quote unquote, overfit, of course, the software can still do some very dangerous things. So it is, sometimes they'll have disengagement-free drives. However, that doesn't mean that it didn't do some really dumb things along the way, where probably we should have intervened and actually disengaged the software, or at least made it do something different that would have been better than what it did. So it's still got a long ways to go. It needs very close supervision, much closer supervision than does auto steer on the highways, the navigate on autopilot, all that stuff. Basically, the features that I have now on my car are much, much safer. FSD Beta, more like an alpha, and it needs very, very close supervision because it may do exactly the wrong thing at the worst time. and you need to be very, very prepared. So that leads me to the last section here is I'll talk about how I plan to use FSD Beta once it comes out to me and why. So briefly, a little while ago, Elon let us all know that the FSD Beta was going to be opened up, and the way that this would work is that with version 10.2, it would open up to people that had opted in and that had received a safety score of 100 out of 100. So a safety score is basically the metric that Tesla Insurance uses to calculate insurance premiums. And it includes things like hard braking, how many forward collision warnings you got, if you got in trouble with autopilot by exceeding the speed limit that it will handle, aggressive turning. If it sees that you're inattentive while autopilot is on, like if it keeps reminding you to put your hands on the wheel but you don't do it and eventually it locks you out, those kinds of things weigh very heavily into the safety score. So I opted in and I've been driving it for a week and a half or I don't know, maybe 2 weeks now, I don't know. And my safety score is a 95. I don't drive very much because I work from home, and so I don't have the opportunity to put in a lot of error-free miles. So, the chances that I'm going to have an error in my short drive are high because it's very much, in the city driving here in Plano, and I don't have a lot of those long highway miles to pull down the weighted average of those errors. So my safety score is a 95. I think I'll probably get it up to like a 96 or a 97 in time, but I'm not all that worried about it. And again, that's because FSD is really still in an alpha stage, and I'm not that excited to get it yet until it is much improved and trained on a wider variety of locations. However, once I do get it, I don't know when that's going to be. It could be with 10.3 or 10.4 or some future version, I don't know. But whenever I get it, I'm going to use it very differently than what you see most of the YouTubers use it. And what they're doing is trying to show you what is the software capable of now. And so they'll let it kind of do whatever it wants unless it hits whatever their limit of comfort or safety is. And then they'll disengage the system or intervene, right? But along the way, you're seeing the software do all kinds of dumb things that we don't want it to train to think it's okay to do. And so what I'll be doing instead is anytime it starts to do something that I don't think is right at all, then I will intervene and give it the correct input. So what does that look like? Well, let's say it's hesitating when I know it's safe to proceed. I'm going to hit the accelerator pedal. Let's say it's inching forward when I think it's a really bad idea. I'm going to hit the brake pedal. Let's say it is not moving into the appropriate lane to make a turn fast enough. I'm going to hit the turn signal and make it do that. If it wants to make a lane change that I think is dumb, I'm going to move the turn signal to cancel that lane change. All right, I'm going to hold my hands tighter on the wheel so that if it starts to take a turn wrong, the trajectory is just wrong, and either because it's not comfortable or not safe, then it'll disengage because I'll have my hands on the wheel tightly, and as it moves out of what I want the car to do, it's going to disengage that wheel, and then it will know what I've done correctly after that. So what I think is really useful about that is that a lot of the times what the testers are doing now is they're just flagging the data by hitting the report function and saying, hey, something bad happened. And yes, it does send some data over to Tesla, but a human then needs to go and look at that data package, and they need to identify what was the error, and then they need to fix it. Maybe they have some communication with the beta tester. But it's a lot of work. And increasingly, because this is the goal, Tesla eventually wants not to control, to do the planning of what the car is going to do based on complex C++ coding. They want to do it through a neural net, end to end. What they need is data like what I'm talking about, where when it does something wrong, there's an intervention and it receives the correct input. And so then the neural net can say, okay, this was bad, this is the right thing to do, learn from that, right, over iterations, and get better and better. And so that's going to be my goal with FSD. So when I drive it, you will not see me, hopefully, unless I make a mistake, you won't see me let it do all kinds of foolish things, and I'll be doing my best to sort of try to provide the right inputs and give it some data that will be useful for it to get better. So it's something to think about, and I think maybe a lot of the other YouTubers do tend to drive more like that when they're not filming for the purpose of showing you what the current state of the software is. So I get why they do that, but at the same time, I think because that's all we see, it kind of misrepresents what I think we should be doing with the vehicles during this beta, which is really trying to help improve the software. Because again, it's more alpha than beta, right? It needs a lot of work. All right, but I'll keep you posted. Hopefully in the future, I will get this FSD beta and we'll be able to play around with it. And I'll be able to show you a little bit more concretely, what I think about its capabilities and what I think about the future. But I do remain hopeful for the future, by the way, again, because of the California overfit thing and seeing the times when it works well in other people's footage. I am very hopeful that we'll continue to make progress. I don't know if we're going to get to sort of really comfortable level 5 autonomy with the current software with the current hardware. They do, of course, have a hardware 4.0 in the works, so an upgraded full self-driving meter. But we'll see. It might get very close anyway, like good enough with hardware 3.0, and as they improve the software, even using the same hardware. So again, I remain hopeful, more to come. Hope you enjoyed today's video and it clarified some things for you. If you did, do please hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.